I'm going to get started with the introduction. As I was saying, it's great to see so many people here who are familiar names, calling in from all over the world. This is our first event of the new year, so really happy to have you all joining us. I'm excited to welcome our three special guests. Basma Hamdy is a research-based designer, author, curator, and educator, producing work that bridges historical, political, and social issues with archival, documentation, and critical mechanisms. She's the co-author of Walls of Freedom, Street Art of the Egyptian Revolution, which came out in 2014, as well as co-author of Khat, Egypt's Calligraphic Landscape, 2018. She has been interviewed and featured in prominent international media and exhibited and spoke at art and design festivals and conferences around the world. She's the associate professor of graphic design and founder of the TypeAraby platform at VCU Qatar. So welcome, Basma. Zainab Alshibani is an honors BFA graduate from VCU Qatar, exploring mysticism and contemplation with Arabic letter forms. Zainab is passionate about creating pieces that deal with dreamlike nations of life, gender, and creative work. Well, Zainab and Hadeel Eltayeb is a curator who explores identity and cultural production in her work. She is currently curator in residence at the Fire Station Gallery in Qatar Museums. Her research has explored facing down the haunting effects of ghosts in the archive and negotiating narratives of ownership through oral histories and negotiating the tension between individual, social, and public remembering through cultural practices. Previously, she was associate curator at Northwestern University in Qatar, curator at Al Riwaq Art Space in Bahrain. Other recent projects include co-curator of This Will Have Been, Archives of Past, Present, and Future with Locale Sudan, and as co-curator of Mediations with Mawani. She was a 2019 research fellow with British Venice Biennale, and her research project, Cultural Imagination and Cultural Memory in Venice, is currently being developed into a wider collaboration with the School for Curatorial Studies in Venice. Her writing has been published on the Venice Biennale blog and in Arab Literature Quarterly. She's contributed to forthcoming publications, Curatorial Archives and Curatorial Practices, Volume 2, Other Geographies, and This Will Have Been, Archives of Past, Present, and Future. Okay, so we're going to get started. You should know that this is a series that we're doing in collaboration with Liwan Design Studios and Labs, which is part of Qatar Museums. And the title of this talk is Qutb Zaman, Exploring Archives, or Exploring Archiving. And the idea, the inspiration for this panel goes back to this initiative that Liwan is doing, which is trying to take all these archival children's books and books that came from the school and try to restore and really explore the value of these archival books. So maybe, Basma, if you'll allow me, we can start with you, and I can ask you a little bit about what your experience has been with TypeAraby and archiving and what this sort of initiative really means in your line of work.
Sure. Thanks, Mikey.
Yeah.
So I just want to say thank you for the intro, and it's my honor to be here with both Hadeel and Zainab. So the idea of archiving, or for TypeAraby in particular. So TypeAraby is an experimental platform dedicated to the creation, preservation, and evolution of Arabic typography and type design, and it was initiated in VCU Arts Qatar. Archiving is a really huge part of what we do, because when we look at archives of old Arabic books, let's say, there's also archives of various calligraphic styles, such as things that were featured in my second book. So the archive is really important to our work because it provides not only a source of inspiration, but also a new method to look at how we can approach Arabic type and lettering, but also type design. So it's a really important aspect of what we do in TypeAraby. And I think the Qutb Zaman initiative is quite important because it allows us to witness firsthand the importance of finding this archive and then working on preserving it, but then also extending that to using that archive to create interesting work inspired by it.
Can I ask a stupid question? What does archiving mean in this context? So like for me on a daily basis, when I think of archiving, I think of like my Gmail inbox. That's like what archiving means to me on, on a functional basis. But when you talk about archiving here, what does it actually mean? Like, what does that verb actually mean? And Basma, maybe you can give me a shot at this, and then I'd be curious if Hadeel and Zainab have different definitions, because I think there's probably multiple definitions for what that verb actually means.
I think Hadeel will probably be better at answering this, but I'll take a shot at it.
Take a shot.
I mean, I think the idea of an archive, I mean, I think we tend to think of an archive like something old and dusty, like it's something that we find, we come across a historical document or a group of photographs or something, and it's sort of like, oh, we need to like dust it away and kind of like make sense of it. But really, I think Derrida talked about the archive as not something to do with the past, but something really related to the future. It's our responsibility to sort of look at the past and not only preserve and try and make sense of it, arrange it in a method that can make sense to future generations and for ourselves. And that can really help us kind of frame what the future could be like for that particular thing that we're archiving, whether that's a political archive, whether that's a typographic archive. I think the idea is really looking at our past in order to understand our future. So that's my like take on it.
Hadeel, how do you think she did?
She did great. She did great. And I feel the same way in terms of archives being more about the future than about the past. Most of the kind of work that I've done about archives has been kind of looking at positionality with archives, and kind of there's obviously the state kind of archive and how it creates order, but then there's also kind of the personal archives that are more fragmented across the city and private archives. And most of my work is to do with kind of oral history, and that kind of forces you to think about kind of the archive as something personal, your relation to yourself in terms of kind of cultural memory and public memory. So that aspect of kind of gathering and ordering of memory in relation to kind of almost like a hierarchy of legacy, that's something that I think it relates to everybody. And when I was thinking about kind of the curatorial archives book that we did, it was interesting you mentioned your inbox. When we were talking about archiving there, we were talking about our notes apps and our Gmail inbox and all of these things that are all part of a fragment of our own kind of conception of memory. And we're always producing a memory, producing kind of our own kind of, I guess, direction in terms of how we think of things and our relation to kind of memory and history in that way. Yeah.
What do you just said something really interesting. You said this as a sort of activity of creating order. What do you, can you sort of dig into that a little more? What do you mean by that? Like functionally, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, I think it's a way of maintaining order. So definitely the state has an agenda with creating order in the society and having control over what's remembered, and there's erasure there in terms of what's documented. And when you're producing a narrative, you're also erasing narratives and selecting who can take part in shaping that narrative. But we also all kind of order what we want to tell people and what we don't want to tell people. Kind of the stories how we want to be remembered, the stories we'd like to tell ourselves. And that's why I think it's interesting to look at kind of archiving from kind of the bottom up rather than the top down, as we're kind of taught to think about it in terms of history, which is why I really like initiatives that are kind of almost, you know, like a fikra, thinking about everything kind of grassroots and kind of bottom up, and how we relate to history in that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Zainab, I want you to chime in a little bit, because if we talk about, before the call, I was asking you a question, and you brought up your thesis project. And obviously that's an example of what Hadeel is talking about, which is a sort of a bottom-up initiative where this is something that you find worthy of exploration. So can you give a little background into what that project was, and I guess some of the maybe conclusions or learnings or findings that you had with that?
So my thesis project was mostly about exploring the potentials of Arabic lettering. And fresh out of college, I interned at Liwan, and I was able to have a very personal experience with the books themselves and arranging them and getting firsthand experience on archiving. And it was my first time with the books. And I think that it was very necessary to get to see the works of Arab artists and how they tried to give the script a chance to express itself and really relate to the medium and the concept that they were working with.
So this was directly, your thesis came first or the internship came first?
No, the internship came later. My thesis came first.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
And so Basma, if we go back to you for a second, for those of us who may not be fully familiar, what are some of the projects that you're working on now with TypeAraby?
Yeah, so we're working on a collaboration with Liwan where we're going to run some workshops for them, and we're also going to workshops related to the archive, the Kutub Zaman archive, and also creating a couple of exhibitions and collaborating on a publication. We just finished, as TypeAraby, we just finished branding the Media Majlis, the previous Media Majlis exhibition. And we've been doing workshops, running lettering workshops, exhibitions. So there's a lot of activities that happen in TypeAraby.
So like what, for the people on the call who haven't been to this library, can you give a general sense of what you're finding and what the point of all these workshops is? Like, what are you hoping to actually, what are the sort of raw materials there, and what are you actually trying to create with?
I think Zainab probably worked on the books a lot closer, but I think just from understanding what the collection is that these books were children's books found in the old school that Liwan is based on in. And those books are important because we, as I think, as a culture, as a region, we tend to sort of, I would say, there's a legacy or a history of kind of dismissing Arabic books or not really considering them as precious as, let's say, English books. And those books were written, some of them were translations, some of them were written by Arab authors, some of them were illustrated by prominent Arab designers, Arab graphic designers who aren't really as known and aren't really as celebrated or even taught or integrated within, like, let's say, graphic design curricula in the region. That is changing. And I think this is why these initiatives are so important. This is why we created TypeAraby, because, you know, I'm teaching in a Western institution. Primarily all of the courses that we teach are based on Western-centric curriculum, right? So how do we kind of bring those voices from the region into the curriculum and into kind of the activities we do with the community to shed light on this important, rich history that we have? A lot of people don't realize that we have a very rich history of Arab graphic designers producing phenomenal illustrations and typographic manifestations that were revolutionary at the time and can kind of form this really important inspirational backdrop for a lot of designers working today. Rather than look at kind of the Western designers for inspiration, why not look at some of these amazing works of art?
Yeah, not to put you on the spot, but as you're sort of leafing through these books, can you identify specific designers by their work that are maybe very prolific? We're like, oh, this is definitely this person, uncredited. Yeah, you can. Yeah,
of course. I mean, Zainab knows because this is what we do a lot. And, you know, I teach a few courses on, you know, Arab designers and you know, Muhyiddin al-Labbad and Hilmi Touni and Burhan Karkutli. Like, there's so many Arab designers that you can quickly identify just by their styles, the way they illustrate. And it's interesting because some of these designers, even though these are primarily children's books, some of these designers also created political posters and created very serious work that isn't like this kind of work, but you can still identify them. You could still tell that this is Hilmi Touni and this is Hilmi Touni.
So those three names, if could you just give a little bit of information about each of those three? For like I think I spoke. I'm sure Bahia have mentioned these three in the interview that I had with her. But I'm curious if you can give a little background, and maybe Zainab and Hadeel feel free to jump in about any names that sort of jump to mind, and what you're really like mining for as you look through this stuff, as you look through these books. Like, what are you actually looking for?
Yeah, like Muhyiddin al-Labad is a really famous Egyptian graphic designer. I mean, the thing about graphic designers is they weren't really considered graphic designers at the time. They were more considered artists that did graphic work. So he created, or he was part of a publishing house called Dar al-Arabi, and he was very prominent in trying to establish a solid foundation for defining graphic design for younger designers in the region. So he created a series of books that were oriented towards teaching young designers how to understand semiotics, how to understand visual language, how to kind of approach design. And he has a wonderful area of books on it. But he also worked in Lebanon for a period of time, and publishing in Dar al-Arabi and creating these beautiful children's illustrations. So he was very specialized, or he had a really rich history with children's illustrations and producing children's books and creating, and even creating comics and creating magazines and yeah, lots of things like that. So he's just one example. There's also Hilmi Touni, who also is very prominent within the children's publications and illustrations. And yeah, so these are just a few. Burhan Karkutli was actually a Syrian designer and artist who was very, very attached to the Palestinian cause. So a lot of the work that he did was primarily for, depicted the Palestinian struggle. I mean, those are some of the ones that come to mind, but I'm sure Zainab, you can jump in.
Yeah.
I think you gave a perfect kind of roundup of all the prominent ones, but I think that also the thing that I was telling Basma about the collection is that I was surprised to see that there were a lot of like female illustrators involved in the publications and who put in a lot of work in putting it together. And it's really sad that they don't get the recognition that they deserve. But overall, Kamal Baluta, I think is how his name is pronounced, but he was our art director for Dar al-Fatah for publishing, and he had a very, as Basma mentioned, he felt passionately about the Palestinian cause, and they had several book collections just dedicated to educating children about the struggles that they went through and giving them characters that they can relate to.
Interesting. Hadeel, I feel like you have something on the tip of your tongue.
No, I was nodding along. No, I just thought it was really interesting because I worked with that collection very briefly when we were kind of cataloging and things for the oral history project I did with Liwan. And yeah, I was, the Dar al-Arabi books were really interesting to me, and I remember there was one that caught my eye in particular called The Evil Eye. And I think, as Basma was saying, the kind of Palestinian cause was really integral to the kind of storytelling that they were putting through. I don't think I don't think it's pictured here, but it is illustrated, I think, by Hilmi Touni. And yeah, it was really interesting because the allegory that they use is kind of really simple and boiled down, but there were also kind of connections to kind of the story of Northern Ireland, and it was really interesting to see that. Yeah, and I think also I was reading about the history of the publishing house in, I think, Signs of Conflict by Zainab Alshibani, and I think she's going to be doing.
Yeah, she's on in 2 days. She's going to be on the program.
Yeah, so I thought it was really interesting because when I was doing my MA, I did it on kind of solidarity and transnational solidarity, and I interviewed her actually for it and asked her some questions, and yeah, cool. So I was just nodding along with interest, but not much to say.
Tell me a little bit about this oral history project that you were doing.
for Liwan.
Yeah.
So we actually did it on, it was more about the site of the school. So it's a really beautiful location, an interesting location. It's in Misharib, which is now kind of the historic kind of area in Doha, where a lot of these kind of, at the moment now they're restoring kind of a lot of heritage houses and things like that. And that Liwan, I think, used to be the site of the first girls' school in Doha, which went by several names. I think the first name was al-Mu'mineen, and it was founded by Amna Mahmoud al-Jada. So she's a really important figure to a lot of people in Doha. A lot of women have been taught by her personally, and they had these stories. So I worked with the interns Arshi, who works at Liwan now, and Manal, kind of creating an oral history around that. And the stories that they had around the site of the school were just really, really interesting and really personal. The book collection actually was a really good, trigger, I guess, for people, like a sensory trigger, to get them to kind of recall things, which is really great to do because, you know, the smell, kind of the sights, them walking around, would be really good at kind of getting them to kind of recall memories. So yeah, the collection was a really great source of inspiration.
So in your experience, is there something special about this collection, or do you suspect that like 60% of houses have similar dormant collections in closets and cupboards, and there just isn't a will or a call to action for people to realize that they have these treasures that need to be actually archived? That's when I see you nodding along. Maybe Hadeel, you look like you have something to say too. Maybe we'll go in that order.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't really think it's about this particular collection being special. I think this is like a collection that you would find in any school, and you know, and especially, I mean, maybe for Qatar, it probably is special, right? Because I think a lot of people, as you mentioned, don't really realize the value of these books. And they might be sitting in someone's, you know, library gathering dust, and they don't really realize that these are actually amazing works of art. But in Egypt, I think you would find a lot of similar collections and archives in libraries and lots of spaces. There's a lot of initiatives happening that are trying to kind of preserve Arabic book covers and Arabic cassette covers and Arabic vinyl covers, and because you would also find treasures, you know, being sold in stores all over Cairo, and I know the same for Lebanon. And you really have to dig through piles and piles of books and kind of pick and choose. So there's a lot of initiatives that are trying to kind of curate that and preserve that. Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah. Hadeel, do you have a similar sense?
Yeah, I mean, I was really interested in maybe like how some of these books got to Qatar in terms of kind of the networks that they would have traveled through. I think particularly the Dar al-TypeAraby collection as well. I think that was a lot of interest for a lot of people. Wa'il Mur'us, when he came to Qatar, I know Basma knows him very well. He was really interested in that as well, and he was saying how he thought it was the biggest collection he'd seen in like one place. And I was speaking to like a friend of mine in Kuwait about whether or not they knew like if a lot of kind of libraries had these books and stuff, because we just hadn't seen them and stuff like that. So that I thought that was quite unique maybe for Qatar, but I can't speak to kind of whether other kind of countries in the Gulf were similar.
Is there a really like comprehensive online archive version of these classic books from the 20th century, or how can somebody peruse these titles if they're not in these places?
You mean in those specific books or other?
No, not these specific books, but like, is there a comprehensive archive somewhere?
So there is a comprehensive archive being, you know, it exists, but it's also being developed by Mo al-Husseini. I know that you met him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he got funding from Afaq to sort of create this amazing archive of book covers. You know, he's also created a design repository of different kinds of archives as well, not just book covers, but also like posters and vinyls and cassettes. That's one archive. Another one is Khazanat al-Kutub by Hussein al-Azat. He's a Jordanian graphic designer. He also collects children's books and has a pretty extensive collection. Yeah, those are the main, I would say, the two main ones off the top of my head. There's also like geographic archive. So there's the Syrian book cover archive that's specifically dedicated to Syrian books or books produced by Syrian artists. So there's other ones for Iraq, for example. So there's, yeah, there are a lot of different archives.
Okay, cool. Hadeel, I want to go back to something you were talking about in terms of sort of the narratives and nation building and narrative building. And talk a little bit, if you can give us a little bit of context into your current position. What does it mean to be sort of a curator at Fire Station? And what is Fire Station? And, you know, what is the purpose of this place?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting, and I'm very lucky to have this opportunity to be at Fire Station. So it's got this great history of kind of being a kind of almost like an incubator for kind of artists, for graduating artists from VCU who do residencies there. I'm doing I'm a curatorial residency, so I've been there for about 3 or 4 months now, developing my project, working with other artists. The Fire Station is part of Qatar Museums. It's at the moment showing kind of the Virgil Abloh show, who sadly passed away recently. So it's there's a lot of kind of things happening there that is to do with kind of the contemporary and modern art scene. My project is again working with sound and oral history, and mostly thinking about soundscapes. So I did a project in Venice that was kind of almost like the kind of beginning of this project, is thinking about how people recall things often incorrectly, and kind of big groups of people can actually recall things incorrectly. So I was interested in kind of where imagination and memory can overlap, and looking at that, kind of interrogating kind of a local context. So I did that quite deeply with Venice, and I was really interested in kind of the methodology as much as what I was coming up with. So I wanted to kind of replicate it somewhere like Doha, which I know very well, even though I'm an expat and I've been here for 4 years. So I've been kind of working with people about specific areas, and how these areas kind of have different memories for different people, and where they can kind of overlap, and using soundscapes to kind of recreate them.
Wow. Amazing. Yeah. How can somebody access this stuff if they're not in Doha?
So it's, at the moment, it's still kind of in development. So there isn't really anything to access for a while. It will be kind of a project later on. But there are, I think, still projects or opportunities to kind of engage with artistic projects online. Like that's the one kind of sad part about like the whole pandemic ending, is that like the access of going in on Zoom and finding things. Some people may not agree. I know a lot of people are sick of Zoom now, but like being able to go on Zoom and find things will still be possible. So yeah, hopefully that will be something later on in the year that people can find.
Cool. Okay, so we're going to have, because there's 3 of you, I want to get to the quick Q&A now, and then there's going to be some questions in the chat. So we'll go, we'll start with Basma, then Zainab, then Hadeel. Okay, so Basma, what are you reading or watching right now?
Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Cool. Okay, nice. Zainab?
The Trial by Franz Kafka.
Wow, no smutty, lowbrow, lowbrow TV viewing. Okay, Hadeel, what about you?
I can come in with some of the lowbrow stuff.
Please.
So I think I'm watching The Great at the moment on Prime Video, which is very lowbrow, but it's great. And reading Sally Rooney's Normal People, which is really good.
Okay, cool. I'm watching, I just finished watching this 1985 Dutch documentary about the birth of hip hop, which is fantastic. I'll remember the name. I think it's the big city, the big noise in the big city. It's on YouTube. It's really pretty remarkable. So
if you want lowbrow, I just finished watching The Tiger King.
okay, there you go. I was waiting for Basma. Okay. So who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present? Basma, go for it.
Muhyiddin al-Labad.
Okay. There you go. Zainab.
I have two. So Kendrick Lamar and Haruki Murakami.
Okay. Very cool. Hadeel, what about you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of one. And I don't want to think too hard about it. Like, just like what would... Kendrick Lamar is a good one. Maybe Mostaf.
Yassine Bey.
Yes, yeah, sorry, Yassine Bey. Yeah, that would be it, yeah.
Maybe if you were back in the 90s, you could still call him Mose.
Yeah, I thought he'd gone back, but maybe I'm wrong. Like, I thought he'd maybe gone back to calling himself Mostaf, but yeah.
Oh, it's true.
Possibly.
It's possible. Okay, so Basma, we'll go back to you. What do people most misunderstand about your work?
That it's not design, that it's just collecting things. And but I consider, because I am a curator as well, so I consider curation as a form of design. I consider the process as a design process. I think a lot of people don't understand curation. They think of curation and they think of an art gallery, and I'm just curating paintings, which is not a bad thing, but I think design curation is misunderstood. And I think design curatorial activism, which is a very kind of activist component of curation, is also not understood at all.
What is curatorial activism? Like, in a sentence, what does that mean?
Well, it's curating with a conscience, like curating with
like editorial curation.
No, while thinking about activist components, like, for example, gender issues, political issues, revisionist histories, relationality, thinking about, the effects of, like, I would say, colonization, for example, decolonizing design or decolonizing histories. That's just in a nutshell, but cool. Yeah, I could talk about it for a long time.
Okay, amazing. Zainab, what do people most misunderstand about your work?
I guess that they maybe that they want it to be legible, like they expect it to be legible just because it's Arabic lettering.
Cool. Yeah. Amazing. Hadeel, what about you?
I'm gonna say something similar to Basma, in that, like, when you're curating, you're producing a narrative and leaving things out, as well as kind of telling a whole story. So you're kind of, there's a power in that and there's an agency in that, but there's also some danger in that. Yeah, so I'm gonna say that, like, I think it's that you're always producing a narrative.
Yeah, it's tough. That's really, really tough. Okay. Last question. Basma, outside of your profession, whose work inspires you?
Outside of my profession?
Yeah.
Oh, I hate being first, like, I'm going to say something so stereotypical, and then Zainab and Hadeel are going to come up with something so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Edward Said. I mean, that's kind of very boring and stereotypical. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe Abdul Halim Hafiz.
Okay, amazing. These are not bad answers. Zainab, what about you?
I'm gonna go with Kendrick again.
Nice. So, Zainab, at this point, do you have a favorite album, favorite track? Is it a mixtape? What?
I think it's To Pimp a Butterfly. And so the track off of that one, Mortal Man, I think it was called. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Hadeel, what about you?
I'm 100% on the same train as Zainab, so I'm going to go for music. Music is really important to me when I'm kind of working my creative process and stuff like that. Really good new album, Children of Zeus. They're from Manchester, kind of rap soul, really good. Yes, the new Snow Allegra album. So music for sure.
Nice. I didn't know we had so many hip hop heads on the call. Amazing. Okay, good to know. All right, so we're going to open up to questions. We have a bunch in the chat, so let me let people unmute themselves. So Hala, you have a couple questions. Maybe you can ask one of them first, and then we'll come back to you afterwards. So if you want to unmute yourself, you can.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all, and hello.
And if you want to start your video, sorry, I should say, if you want to start your video, feel free. You don't need to though, but if you'd like to, feel free.
I would like to, but I apologize in advance because I don't look very camera ready. But it's early morning here. So. I want to thank you again for this very insightful presentation. And I wanted to ask, one of the questions I wanted to ask was for Kutub Zaman, what are the parameters on which you choose to archive specific titles? Or is it basically just everything you find yourself holding onto? And another question would be, I think you've already answered that, which was, are there any plans to create an online database with all of this archive to allow access to the public? And so I got the answer for that, thank you. Third question is how far back were you able to archive? And can you tell us if you have any interesting findings while observing the progress of Arabic literature? And I'm, of course, especially concentrating on children's book. I do have a fourth question, but I will let you answer these first and see if we have time later. Thank you.
Great. Do any of the panelists feel brave enough to tackle one?
I guess for the Liwan archive, we weren't mainly trying to pick and choose the books that we archive. And that's because I think that, was it the design repository who came out with like an Arab oath when it comes to archiving, is that you don't, curate the collection and just pick and choose things that look visually interesting or things that are popular or books that you think would have value. And so I think mostly we're just archiving all of the books just so we can give the public a chance to really see the collection and pick and choose whichever they're interested in.
Great. Hadeel, I know that you played a role as well in sort of making sense of the big pile of books in the beginning. What was that process like, and how did you actually approach that task?
It was dialogic, so I was working with Arshi. So Arshi, I think, is actually here. I saw a question from her. So we were just discussing and looking through and like what. I think we were very visually led in terms of what we selected and what was interesting to us. A lot of them were, there were a lot of interesting ones that weren't necessarily in great condition, so those kind of went to the side. But it was a really great process, and I know it's, hi Arshi, I'm reading below, but yeah, like it was a great process, and it was good to work with someone else on it. There's no, I think, expertise when it comes to this kind of thing. It's about kind of what kind of makes sense visually. And I know that like Basma and her team have done a great job of kind of further selecting it to kind of, to the current archive.
Okay, cool.
I would add that some of the books, some of the books, I think it's also important to just clarify that some of the books like Fadi, Semi, and Hedi are translations, and a lot of So some children's books are illustrations of, let's say, English books or Western books, and some are original creations by Arab, authors and illustrators. And it's interesting because sometimes when you translate, let's say, Donald Duck or these DuckTales or these stories, or let's say Tintin, a lot of Tintin is translated. Some editing happens. So not everything gets translated one for one. Sometimes the translator will omit things or add things, which is, I think it's a really interesting phenomenon to look at as well. But I would say it would be good to, like, maybe the translated books can be in one pile, separate from the other books. It would be good to maybe keep them distinct.
Cool. Thanks, Ada. The next question is from Ala, and I was asked to read it. So the question is, are archives only for reading, or are there voice reading of books or information by voice? Let's maybe Zainab, you seem to be pretty familiar with the collection. Is there a simple answer to that question?
I think for now it's just direct interaction with the books themselves, but I know that a digital archive is being developed, and I'm not sure about the audio readings.
Okay. All right, so the next question comes from Arshi, actually. Arshi, do you want to unmute yourself? Aforementioned Arshi.
Feel free to skip the question. Hadil's already gone through it in detail, so.
Okay. All right, then I suppose the last question also I was asked to read is from Brenda. As it's so terrific that this collection exists. The opportunities for research in many fields is mind-blowing. As a retired librarian, I know that few Western academic library collections bother with children's literature, quote unquote, bother with children's literature, but it has amazing possibilities for discovering what kids were being taught at a given time. And then basically I said, I look forward to the collection being digitized and available worldwide. I'm curious, maybe I can tack on a question there, which is, what familiarity did you all have with children's literature of the Arab world before working with this collection? Maybe Basma, we can start with you. Is that a known repository of graphic design and sort of typography and illustration? Is that a sort of a known repository of wealth, or was this your first like very in-depth interaction with it, with children's books?
Yeah, I think I love children's books and I love Arabic children's books. So I am familiar, but I think I'm an exception. Like, I think most people, maybe unless they read a book like that as children, they might not be familiar with the scope of a collection like this. But I think Brenda's question is interesting because it really is true. If you look at children's books, it really can give you a window on kind of the discourse of and kind of political and social situation and what children were taught, what they were sort of so there's some really interesting examples, let's say, of children's books. There's a very famous example of a children's book called Baba Gamal, about Gamal Abdel Nasser, and it was all about praising Gamal Abdel Nasser's achievements, and those were things that you would read to a child, and it tells you all of the things that Gamal Abdel Nasser did. And I think there's a lot of similar books like that. There's also a lot of books that are discussing like the Palestinian struggle and trying to teach kids about, let's say, there's a really famous spread by Muhyiddin al-Labed called in one of the magazines, is called Naftun Arabi. It's all about the oil and gas and how it's not supposed to be imported to the West, and so that it really does give you insight on what the political situation or the social kind of situation was at the time. So it's a really good, insightful comment, I think.
Would you say that most of these books, these children's books, were they nationalistic? Did they all have nationalistic fervor?
Some do, definitely some do, and some are just either translations of folk tales or maybe just tales from Alf Layla wa Layla. So there's a big range, like 1001 Nights, but some are political. I think some are political because they have a certain agenda. And I think a lot of the illustrators and artists that were working on these books, they themselves had very strong political views. And so they integrated that into the stories they told children.
Yeah. I would imagine that children's books being published now are not nearly as political in the region. You think that's safe to say or not really?
I would say, I mean, just from knowing a few prominent writers and illustrators of children's books that are publishing now. So there's a really interesting publishing house called Hadeel by Miranda Bshara. She's creating and publishing these really amazing new children's books. It's not about politics per se. I mean, they are creating a book, let's say, about the Egyptian Revolution, specifically teaching kids about the Egyptian Revolution and trying to, I think I can't see my screen for some reason.
Yeah, your camera went away, I think.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. So I'll just keep talking. You can hear me, right?
That's okay. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I think it's not just necessarily about political issues, but it definitely integrates.
Oh, no.
Okay. Now I think we lost her entirely. Okay. Well, I think, so the last thing I just want to mention is for anyone listening, if you'd like to, you can go and check out Instagram account at liwan.archive. That's liwan.archive. And there'll be photos of a bunch of the books. And I imagine photos of the progress of this entire archive, the life of the archive. So are there any final comments that Zainab or Hadeel that you'd like to bring up before we wrap up?
Not that I can think of at the moment. Just thank you for the team at Liwan for giving us the opportunity and the platform, and thank you for Africa for giving us a platform to speak today. It's been great.
Yeah, Zainab, how about you?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for being here, and again for Liwan for providing me the opportunity to work with the books, and it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, Basma, we have you back now. Any final parting? No worries. Any final parting thoughts before we wrap up?
No, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really looking forward to the collaboration with Liwan.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. If you have the pleasure of being in Qatar, pass by, check it out. And you can follow all of our guests on social media. Their handles are on the screen, and you can follow the Liwan archive at Liwan.archive. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. This will go up on our podcast and YouTube feed in the next couple of days, and we will see you tomorrow. We have an event with author Safia El-Helo. We're going to be talking about her novel in verse, A Home Is Not a Country. And then on Thursday, we're speaking with Zainab Masri about her collection of books, including Off the Wall, which is one of my favorite graphic design related titles about political posters during the Lebanese Civil War. So that should be a lot of fun too. So everyone, enjoy your weekend or week, and we will talk soon. Bye.